Imagine a country where you can walk along a perfectly clean avenue in the evening Minsk, almost without hearing a single car horn, where a giant dump truck can carry away hundreds of tons of rock, and in an ancient forest, an animal weighing nearly a ton disappears between the trees completely silently, where there are noticeably more women than men, but behind that impressive number hides a story that is far from romantic, and where outward order coexists with one of the strictest legal systems in Europe. This is Belarus, a country that some imagine as the last island of the Soviet Union. Others know for potato pancakes, tractors, and European bison, and still others cannot even confidently point to on a map. But none of these images explains how people live here, why Minsk seems almost implausibly tidy, and whether Belarusian women really are the loneliest in Europe. Today we will see Belarus without the postcard gloss and without the usual black and white template. We will examine why this flatland country has found itself in the path of foreign armies for centuries, how a military catastrophe still affects demographics to this day, why locals seem cold at first and then invite you to their homes, how heavy industry coexists with IT, and what actually lies behind the loud headline about beautiful and lonely women. And closer to the finale, we will return to the main contradiction: why a place that tourists remember as clean, calm, and safe simultaneously sparks so much debate in Europe. The answer here cannot fit into a single slogan. That is why you should watch to the end. The most unexpected side of Belarus begins where the perfect streets end. If you enjoy documentary travel stories in which a country turns out to be more complex than its own stereotype, subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what word first comes to your mind when Belarus is mentioned. And now, let's look at the map. It explains more than it seems. Belarus is located in Eastern Europe and has no access to the sea. To the east it borders Russia, to the south Ukraine, to the west Poland, and to the northwest Lithuania and Latvia. On the map, it is almost entirely flat land, without a huge mountain wall or a sea that could serve as natural protection. The country's area is about 208,000 square kilometers. That is larger than many people imagine, but the population is relatively small and has been declining in recent years. The National Statistical Committee of Belarus, known as Belstat, publishes the country's official demographic and economic indicators, and the World Bank's page on Belarus allows one to see a longer-term dynamic of population and economy. Both pictures lead to one important conclusion: the space here is vast, and there are fewer and fewer people. Forests cover a significant part of the territory. Between them lie thousands of rivers, lakes, swamps, and agricultural fields. The country has 6 regions, and Minsk has a separate status. But dry administrative divisions say almost nothing about the distances. You can cross Belarus for hours, watching a similar landscape: a flat road, a shelter belt, a field, a small settlement, forest again. Such geography creates an impression of calm, but historically it was precisely this openness that made this land vulnerable. Trade routes passed through the territory of modern Belarus, states and borders changed, and the interests of neighboring powers collided. These lands were part of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, the Russian Empire, and the Soviet Union. At different times, Belarusian, Polish, Russian, Yiddish, and other languages were spoken here. That is why any attempt to describe the country as exclusively Eastern or exclusively Western always loses something. It seems to me that Belarus is more accurately understood as a space of intersection. It is not simply located between Russia and the European Union. For centuries, it was shaped between different religions, languages, political systems, and ideas about the past. Sometimes this produced cultural diversity, sometimes it turned the plain into a corridor for armies. The 20th century proved especially harsh. World War I, the revolution, border changes, and repression left a deep mark. But the greatest catastrophe was World War II. Minsk was almost destroyed, hundreds of villages burned, and population losses were among the highest in Europe. Practically every family has its own story of war, evacuation, occupation, or the deaths of relatives. And this is not just a chapter in a textbook. War memory is present in urban space, monuments, family stories, and state symbolism. It helps explain why the words peace, order, and stability carry a special emotional weight here. When a society has survived the destruction of familiar life several times, the promise of calm sounds not like a tedious formality, but like protection against a repeat of chaos. After the war, Minsk was rebuilt almost from scratch. That is why the capital center does not resemble an old European city with a labyrinth of narrow medieval streets. Here are wide avenues, large squares, symmetrical facades, and monumental buildings. Independence Avenue stretches through the city like a carefully staged set, where architecture is meant to convey scale and order to the people. But Minsk has not remained stuck in the post-war era. Next to the heavy stone facades, cafes, shopping centers, modern residential neighborhoods, and the metro are in full operation. The National Library looks as though a giant polyhedron was dropped onto the city from a science fiction film. In the evening, its facade turns into a luminous screen. And the Trinity suburb offers a completely different scene. Small, colorful houses, water, a promenade for strolls, and an attempt to bring a human scale back to the city. The first thing a visitor often notices is the cleanliness. It is so striking that it quickly becomes part of any tourist story about Minsk. Well-groomed flower beds, tidy metro stations, wide sidewalks, little visual chaos. But it's important not to turn this observation into a fairy tale about a city where every inch is perfect. In residential neighborhoods, there are ordinary courtyards, renovations, traffic jams, and tired people coming home from work. It's just that public space here is genuinely more controlled and better maintained than in many large cities. I support the respect for shared space. A clean park and reliable transport should not be a political slogan. They are the basic right of every resident. But I don't think it's fair to explain all of Belarusian orderliness solely by some innate tidiness of the people. Behind it are municipal services, regulations, fines, urban planning, and a management system. A beautiful result exists, but the cost and the methods used to achieve it also deserve discussion. By day, Minsk may seem reserved, but in the evening, it becomes warmer. Coffee shops, bars, and restaurants fill up, and people meet after work. There's no need for constant noise to feel the city's nightlife. Often, it's just a quiet conversation over a table, a walk through the center, or a small gathering. And in this rhythm, you begin to notice a character that a tourist might initially mistake for coldness. Belarusians often keep their distance at first. A stranger might get a short reply without the obligatory smile or exuberant enthusiasm. In a culture where trust is built gradually, politeness doesn't always look like American openness or Southern European emotional warmth. But once you get to know someone, the distance can disappear very quickly. You get invited to someone's home, they put everything they have on the table, introduce you to the family, and start talking as if they've known you for years. Belarus has two official languages, Belarusian and Russian. In big cities, Russian is heard more often, but Belarusian remains a crucial symbol of culture and identity. You can see it on signs, hear it in music, theater, education, and in the everyday speech of some residents. Between the two languages, there is also trasyanka, a mixed speech, which varies from family to family and from region to region. Language here is not just a tool. It can reveal a person's origins, social circle, education, and attitude toward history. So a visitor shouldn't decide for the locals which language is correct for them. A few words of respect and a willingness to listen work better than any lecture on national identity. Now, back to the topic that brought many viewers here. Is it true that Belarus has the most beautiful and the loneliest women in Europe? Beauty cannot be measured by statistics. Neither the World Bank nor Belarus's statistical office publishes an attractiveness rating, and any such list says more about the author's taste than about the people it ranks. Belarus does have a strong tradition in fashion, sports, and performing arts, and in the cities, you will certainly see many well-groomed people. But reducing millions of women to a single tourist attraction would be both inaccurate and disrespectful. However, the demographic part of that headline does have a real basis. According to the World Bank's data, women make up more than half of Belarus's population. The gap becomes especially noticeable in older age groups. One of the main reasons is the difference in life expectancy between men and women. Added to that are historical losses, health disparities, labor migration, and the departure of many young professionals. But more women in the statistics does not mean that every woman is lonely. And it certainly doesn't mean that a foreigner arriving here is guaranteed a romantic adventure. Loneliness depends on age, city, marital status, social circle, and personal choice. A young female professional in Minsk, a mother with children in a regional center, and a retired woman in a village live in completely different realities, even though they all end up in the same column of a statistical table. It seems to me that the loud claim about the loneliest women in Europe works mainly because it conflates two different facts. The first can be verified. There are indeed more women than men. The second cannot be honestly proven. Loneliness cannot be measured by a gender ratio alone. So instead of asking where to find a lonely woman, a more reasonable question would be, and why the demographic gap persists and what it means for families. In many families, women simultaneously build careers, handle household chores, help children, and support elderly relatives. They are widely represented in education, medicine, services, the public sector, and business. This creates an image of independence, but independence does not cancel out the burden. A nicely dressed woman in the center of Minsk may, after work, drive across the entire city, pick up her child, buy groceries, and in the evening, deal with her parents' problems. A tourist sees one frame. Everyday life consists of an entire film. Dating also does not follow a universal script. Some meet through friends, some through apps, some at work or school. In a small town, the social circle is tighter, and reputation is more visible. In Minsk, the choices are wider, but the pace of life and the cost of separate housing create other difficulties. Young people may live with their parents longer, not because of a lack of independence, but because rent takes up too large a share of their income. A foreigner would do well to remember one simple thing. Interest in a person does not give the right to turn their country into a dating catalog. Respect, directness, and the ability to accept rejection matter more than any stories about the Slavic character. I believe that it is precisely this kind of perspective that makes the topic not less attractive, but far more interesting. Behind the appearance appears a personality, behind the statistics, a fate, and behind the promise of easy romance, real life. Now let's change the frame, because Belarus knows how to surprise not only with demographics. A few dozen kilometers from Minsk, they assemble vehicles that look as though an ordinary truck had been enlarged 5 times over. BELAZ produces mining dump trucks for open-pit mining operations. The enterprise's official website presents models of various payload capacities, including machines capable of carrying hundreds of tons. Next to such a dump truck, a person looks almost toy-like, and a wheel can be taller than a small house. This is one of the most powerful visual symbols of Belarusian industry. The Soviet legacy here manifests not only in architecture. Machine building, tractors, optics, electronics, oil refining, and fertilizer production still play an important role. In the Sologorsk area, potash salts essential for agriculture are mined. For a country without vast reserves of oil and gas, the ability to produce machinery and export fertilizers became a way to secure a place in the international economy. But alongside the workshop and the quarry, another Belarus has grown, a digital one. The official page of the high-tech park describes a special regime for technology companies and specialists creating software products for the international market. Belarus is associated with the stories of World of Tanks, Viber, EPAM, and many lesser-known teams that worked for global clients. This contrast is almost ideal for a documentary film. In the morning, an engineer might pass a tractor factory on the way to work, and in the afternoon write code for a client on another continent. The country simultaneously preserves a 20th century industrial model and tries to compete in an economy where the product weighs not a single gram. After the events of 2020 and the subsequent sanctions, the technology sector changed. Some companies and specialists relocated their work to other countries. This struck not only offices, but also the urban class of young people who earned well, traveled, and were creating a new image of Minsk. Here, politics suddenly becomes demographics. When a specialist leaves, the country loses not only a worker, but sometimes a future family, a taxpayer, and a person who might have opened their own company. And yet, the economy is not limited to exports and large enterprises. Most people live ordinary lives. They earn a salary, compare prices, pay for utilities, think about renovations, and save up for major purchases. Minsk generally offers higher incomes and more job openings, but housing there is more expensive. In regional cities, rent may be more affordable, but the choice of work is smaller. The average figure again conceals several different countries within a single border. To understand Belarus not through a table but through taste, you need to sit down at the table. And almost inevitably, potatoes will appear there. Draniki is the most famous dish, but the secret is not in a complicated recipe. Grated potatoes are fried until golden brown and served hot, often with sour cream. It seems it couldn't be simpler until two families start arguing over whether to add onion, flour, or egg. At that moment, an ordinary pancake turns into a question of tradition. There is potato babka, stuffed koldani, meat machanka eaten with pancakes, pickles, mushrooms, rye bread, and dairy products. Kvass is refreshing in summer, and in winter the table becomes heavier and more filling. Such cuisine grew not from a desire to impress a restaurant critic, but from the climate, rural labor, and the need to feed a family with affordable ingredients. But modern food in Minsk is far more diverse than just potatoes. Here you'll find coffee shops, Asian establishments, Georgian cuisine, burger joints, and chef-driven restaurants. A young capital resident might grab a coffee to go in the morning, have a business lunch in the afternoon, and in the evening visit their parents, where Draniki are still waiting for them. The tradition doesn't disappear, it simply ceases to be the only option. At the table, the Belarusian form of hospitality becomes especially clear. A person may go a long time without showing emotion, but will make sure a guest never leaves hungry. Refusing a second helping is sometimes perceived almost as a mistake in negotiations. And here I support one simple idea. A country is truly easier to understand through its home cooking than through a set of souvenirs. Food reveals the climate, income, family ties, and how much time people are willing to give one another. After a hearty table, it's time to head out to the water. Belarus has no sea, but it has so many lakes that some regions look like a northern resort in summer. Narach is the country's largest lake. It's called the Belarusian Sea. A wide expanse of water, beaches, pine forests, and sanatoriums create the feeling that the shoreline has receded further than usual. In the northwest lie the Braslaw Lakes, a chain of water bodies among forests and low hills. The rhythm here is different. Fishing, a boat, a cool morning, mist over the water, and roads where you can drive a long time without meeting a major city. Belarus, often imagined through concrete and stern squares, suddenly becomes green and almost deserted. But the main natural symbol is located in the west, near the border with Poland. Bialowieza Forest is one of the last large fragments of Europe's ancient lowland forest. UNESCO describes this transboundary World Heritage Site as an exceptional forest ecosystem with rich biodiversity. Here, an old tree isn't necessarily removed right after it falls. It decomposes, becomes home for insects, and nourishment for the next generation of plants. The forest exists not as a tidy urban park, but as a complex system in which the death of one organism sustains the life of another. And somewhere between the trunks moves the European bison, the largest land mammal in Europe. An adult male can weigh nearly a ton. After disappearing from the wild, the species was brought back thanks to breeding and restoration programs. Today, the bison has become a national symbol, but encountering one still doesn't feel like visiting a monument. It's a large, powerful, and unpredictable animal that you cannot approach for a spectacular shot. I consider the restoration of the bison one of the country's most impressive stories. Political systems change, borders argue with one another, and the forest reminds us of a time measured not by elections and 5-year plans, but by generations of trees. And it is precisely after this silence that the next topic sounds especially jarring. Belarus has been led by Alexander Lukashenko since 1994. The system of power is highly centralized, and the state controls a significant part of the economy and public life. Supporters speak of order, social stability, and preserved enterprises. Critics point to the restriction of political competition, pressure on independent media, and repression. After the 2020 presidential election, mass protests swept the country. The OSCE-ODIHR, in its report on Belarus, described human rights violations in the context of the election and subsequent events. For some residents, this period became a moment of hope. For others, a fear of losing familiar stability. And for many families, it ended in detentions, emigration, or a heavy silence around the kitchen table. Here, it's especially easy to fall into extremes. You can show only clean streets and decide that the system works perfectly. You can show only repression and forget that millions of people continue to raise children, treat patients, teach students, repair cars, and joke with friends. Both frames are real. The mistake begins when one of them is declared to be the whole country. But there is one fact that cannot be sidestepped with soft phrasing. Belarus remains the only country in Europe where the death penalty is applied in practice. Amnesty International, in its country report on Belarus, draws attention both to death sentences and to broader human rights problems. The execution procedure is shrouded in secrecy, and relatives of the condemned may not receive full information. I oppose the death penalty. Not because serious crimes don't require punishment, but because a judicial error cannot be corrected after the sentence has been carried out. It seems to me that a state which declares the value of order should be especially strict in limiting its own irreversible power over a person. And so we return to the main paradox. A tourist can stroll safely through central Minsk in the evening, admire the cleanliness of the metro, and feel secure. At the same time, a local resident may choose words about politics very carefully. Outward calm does not necessarily mean inner freedom, but political unfreedom also does not make every minute of everyday life gloomy. Belarus exists in this tension every day. From a practical standpoint, traveling here requires preparation. Entry rules, available routes, bank cards, insurance, and border restrictions can vary depending on citizenship and the political situation. So an old video or a random forum cannot be considered a definitive guide. You need to check official requirements specifically before your trip. Inside the country, transport and everyday services may seem accessible to many foreigners, especially outside Minsk. But the word cheap always depends on your income. For a tourist, the price of a ticket may be small. For someone with a local salary, the same expenses add up to a completely different picture. Belstat and the World Bank are useful precisely here. They bring the conversation back from one traveler's impressions to the scale of the entire country. The best time for nature is late spring, summer, and early autumn. In winter, Belarus turns into a different film. Short days, snow, damp cold, and warm-lit windows of homes. Winter temperatures are not always extreme, but the wind and dampness quickly explain why local cuisine is so hearty. In summer, forests and lakes offer more freedom, but mosquitoes appear, which tourist postcards usually stay silent about. So what is the real Belarus like? It is a country where ancient forest has outlived empires, wars, and border changes, where the bison was brought back from near extinction, and giant machines are sent to work in quarries on other continents, where Soviet architecture coexists with digital companies, and the Russian language with a returning interest in Belarusian. It is a country of women who truly make up the majority of the population, but are not obliged to fit someone else's fantasy of beauty or loneliness. Behind the demographic advantage lie higher female life expectancy, male mortality, migration, family burden, and historical memory. A loud headline brings a viewer to the topic, but respect begins where we stop seeing statistics instead of a person. It is a country of order, which can be convenient and beautiful, but should not close off the conversation about the price of control. I value clean streets, preserved forests, working transport, and hospitality. I do not support the attempt to use these virtues as justification for political repression or the death penalty. Loving a place does not mean closing your eyes to its problems. Criticizing the authorities does not mean despising the people who live there. Perhaps that is why Belarus is so hard to explain in a single word. It is calm, but not simple. Green, but industrial. Restrained, but hospitable. Familiar in language and architecture, but unexpected if you give it time. And now the main question for you. What surprised you more? The demographic gap, the giant BELAZ trucks, technological Belarus, Bialowieza Forest, the death penalty, or how much clean Minsk hides a complex history? Write your answer in the comments. Like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next journey. We will again head to where the tourist postcard ends and the real country is just beginning.